There I stood, ankle deep in water, gushing from my front yard, screaming at two HOA contractors with a running jackhammer in hand. They looked at me like I was the one losing it. One of them had the audacity to ask, "Why'd you bury your main line there?" As if I had placed the water main in the 70s. No, this isn't some fictional tale. It's the reality when a Karen-backed, pretend HOA tries to enforce militia-like control in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep, that's me. The guy whose private well Karen tapped into for her garden without asking. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And trust me, that was just the start. If you're wondering how things escalated from jackhammers to sewage sabotage, buckle up. This HOA drama spiraled out of control faster than a toddler on Red Bull. My name's Alex, 38, recently divorced, with enough free time, sarcasm, and post-divorce bitterness to turn pettiness into an art form. I moved into this so-called community 8 months ago, drawn in by the low crime rate, quiet streets, and the stunning mountain views. It felt like maybe, just maybe, life was giving me a second chance. But then I met Karen. Karen Davis, the HOA president, was the type who wore a pressed polo and wielded a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. She always had that tight-lipped smile, like she was holding in either a lawsuit or a lemon. At first, I tried to stay under the radar. I kept my lawn in shape, paid my community fees, and even attended those awkward monthly HOA meetings where we pretended to care about mailbox color consistency. But some people, like Karen, were born to lead HOAs. She thrived on bylaws, power plays, and passive-aggressively dictating everyone's landscaping choices. The trouble started when I refused to pay an absurd charge for a water beautification project. That's right. Karen wanted the residents to fund decorative sprinklers around the neighborhood. Even though we were all under drought restrictions, when I asked what the money was going towards, she gave me the same look you'd give a child who doesn't understand their role in community optics. I told her optics don't pay my water bill. That was when Karen decided I was the problem. Fast forward 2 weeks, 2 guys in neon vests showed up on my lawn with a jackhammer. No warning, no permits, not even a heads-up email. And my house wasn't even officially part of the HOA. They never had me on the map. But Karen didn't care. The moment the water main exploded, it was like Old Faithful had relocated to my front yard. Water and mud flooded the place. My furniture floated like it was trying to escape. I rushed out, barefoot, to stop the chaos, dodging sparks from the landscape lighting they had also clipped. When I asked who authorized the work, they said, the HOA president. I demanded if they had a permit. Nope, Karen had taken care of it. So I shut off the main line, but the damage was already done. The pipe burst had soaked through my foundation, flooded my crawl space, and fried my water heater. Michael strolled over like it was a social visit, as I was still trying to move my soaked furniture. She casually said, "Oh, that's unfortunate. You should have told us your line was there." I dug through every HOA document I could find and, in the depths of the bylaws, discovered something juicy. Article 12, Clause C. If HOA contracted work caused property damage, they were responsible for triple the repair costs. And, of course, Karen hadn't amended the rules since she started giving work to her cousin's unlicensed, sketchy business. The repairs were going to cost $28,000, and with triple damages, Karen had just made herself liable for $84,000. But that wasn't all. As I was looking into things, I found a PVC pipe running from her backyard to a sprinkler system in her garden. Turns out, she was siphoning water from my private well, the one I'd had installed long before she even moved in. I made a call to my buddy Marcus, and that's when things got real interesting. I used to work in city code enforcement before I became a full-time plumber and chaos instigator. So, when I asked my buddy Marcus how tough it would be to reroute a non-pressurized line through a gray water holding tank, he gave me a grin and asked, on a scale of 1 to civil lawsuit, "How much fun are you looking for?" With that, we got to work. While Michael was hosting some HOA community brunch about neighborhood morale, Marcus and I had bigger plans. Technically, it was my water system. The pipe was on my property, and I was just testing a new waste filtration method. For the next 2 hours, what flowed through Michael's illegal garden irrigation wasn't just murky. It was poetic justice. She came home to a smell, and then her roses withered. Her begonias turned black. The real fun began when she marched over to my door, screaming about sabotage and environmental terrorism. Right as I hit play on the footage I'd recorded of her cousin's crew admitting they had no idea what they were digging into, I calmly told her to file a formal complaint per HOA procedure. She stormed off, visibly rattled. But that was just the appetizer. The next morning, as she tried to put a lien on my property for unauthorized system tampering, she had no idea I'd already filed a claim in small claims court with photos, receipts, contractor statements, and a certified copy of the HOA bylaws. Michael was about to find out exactly what happens when you put the wrong guy's lawn underwater. The morning after I filed, I brewed the strongest coffee imaginable and sat on my porch watching Michael strut by my house like a hen obliviously wandering into a fox's den. She had no idea what was coming: the lawsuit, the triple damages clause, or the storm of accountability that was brewing right under her nose. She thought this was just another HOA power play, but I was playing chess while she was still fumbling with Monopoly. Later, I got a formal letter from the HOA's lawyer, Brent. It was a mess of threats about how I interfered with their projects, slandered the board, and made the neighborhood unsafe by messing with the water infrastructure. The mental gymnastics in that letter were Olympic-worthy. So, I printed out my repair estimates, the municipal water maps, and the HOA bylaws, which they clearly forgot about, and attached a sticky note. I'm sure the judge will enjoy this bedtime story. See you in court. Certified mail sent. Brent signed for it. The next week, Michael called an emergency HOA meeting. The flyer said it was about a community safety crisis. I showed up, snacks in hand, ready for a front row seat. About 30 neighbors attended, some annoyed, some curious. But all were caught off guard when Michael launched into a rambling speech about external threats, malicious litigation, and updating the bylaws. Then, she proposed an emergency vote to amend the triple damages clause. But Greg, a guy from 2 houses down who always wore sandals with socks, raised his hand and asked, "Isn't that the same clause that protected the Walkers in 2019 when the contractor messed up their retaining wall?" Michael blinked like a deer in headlights. Apparently, she'd forgotten about that one. Mrs. Walker stood up and reminded everyone, "I never got paid for that, by the way." The tension in the room was palpable. Michael tried to regain control, but people started whispering. One guy asked, "If Alex isn't technically in the HOA, how is she allowed to do work on her property?" Silence. I stood up, slowly pulled out the plat map showing my property line, and said, "That's a good question. Maybe Michael can answer it in her deposition." Half the room gasped like we were in a courtroom drama. The other half just turned to stare at her. Michael muttered something about miscommunication and stormed out, leaving the meeting without a vote or amendment. That night, I got an email from Brent. "Can we settle this privately?" I didn't respond immediately. 2 days later, I sent the final damage estimate, a copy of the invoice from my lawyer, Marcus, now officially hired, and highlighted the clause in the bylaws again. The note: deadline for payment is 45 days from the date of incident, per your own bylaws. For the next few weeks, things were oddly quiet. Michael avoided me, and neighbors began dropping by with cookies or beers, sharing stories about the things they'd seen her do. Carl, an ex-Marine from down the street, even told me he'd caught Michael taking photos of his backyard deck months ago, pretending to inspect code compliance. It was like a dam had burst, and everyone had their own Michael story to share. But Michael wasn't done know her. Pride wouldn't let her just write a check and slink away. She needed to make a statement, so in a last-ditch effort to regain control. There it was, a massive HOA notice slapped on my door, complete with official letterhead, accusing me of creating a hostile environment, violating the so-called community spirit, and failing to comply with their ever-changing directives. Apparently, my sewage stunt had crossed the line, and now they were fining me $200 a day until I agreed to submit to an HOA inspection. She even threatened to remove my mailbox. It was almost laughable, considering she had absolutely no idea what she was up against. What she didn't know, and what she had clearly failed to research, was that my mailbox was installed under federal regulations due to a rural delivery agreement with the USPS, meaning if she dared touch it, she'd be committing a federal crime. I snapped a photo of the notice and sent it straight to the local postmaster. 3 days later, Michael got a letter of her own from the United States Postal Service. If that wasn't enough, remember the contractors with the jackhammers? Well, one of them had posted a TikTok about the whole fiasco. He filmed the geyser, tagged the HOA, and even casually mentioned, "I told her this looked like a bad idea, but she paid cash." That video went viral, 300,000 views viral. Someone tagged me in the comments, and I watched it in stunned silence before bursting out laughing so hard I dropped my phone. The HOA board had no choice. They were now dealing with a liability. Neighbors started calling for John's removal from the board. The damage wasn't just financial anymore. It was reputational. Michael's name was now mud, and all it took was one lawsuit, one clause, and one broken pipe to set the community into motion. Just when I thought it was all winding down, and the HOA board emailed to say they were reviewing her actions, I got a knock at the door. It was Michael, tired, puffy eyes, and clutching a folder. She said, "I'd like to discuss terms." I let her in, partly out of curiosity and partly because I had my phone recording the entire interaction. She sat down and asked, "What do you want?" I told her I wanted triple damages, a written apology, and her resignation from the board. She laughed like I told a joke, but I didn't laugh back. I showed her the TikTok footage of the contractor's confession, the USPS email, and finally, the demand letter from my lawyer. That's when her face shifted from arrogance to pure fear. She stood up, folder in hand, and left my house without another word. The next morning, the neighborhood was greeted with a mass email from the HOA board titled Leadership Update and Financial Disclosure. Attached was a PDF stating that Michael Davis had stepped down, effective immediately. But the real twist was on page 2, under a small heading, Pending Claims. Apparently, I wasn't the only one with a lawsuit. I always thought the phrase "see you in court" was just something villains say in movies, like the bad guy smirking while dramatic music plays. But when I walked into that small claims courtroom with my evidence, it felt more like a bad sitcom than an action movie. The fluorescent lights flickered, the judge looked like he hadn't had breakfast, and Michael, well, she was 30 minutes late, carrying a pile of disorganized papers and looking like she just licked a car battery. No lawyer, just her and her brutal confidence. She tried to sit at the plaintiff's table, but the bailiff gently guided her to the defendant's side. I didn't even have to say a word. When the judge called the case, he glanced at the file, raised an eyebrow, and said, "This is quite a situation." I nodded, "Yes, Your Honor. I have all the documentation ready to go." Michael interrupted before he finished speaking, claiming that I sabotaged HOA property, harassed her, and poisoned her garden with sewage. The judge blinked, clearly questioning if he was still on the right medication, before asking, "Ma'am, are you countersuing?" Michael sputtered, "No." "Then please refrain from testimony until it's your turn." I slid my folder forward, repair estimates, plumbing blueprints, photos of the flooded yard, emails from the contractor, and screenshots of Michael approving the work. At the top of the stack was a highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws with the triple damages clause bookmarked in neon pink. The judge skimmed through everything before turning to Michael and asking, "Do you dispute the damage caused by the HOA-approved contractor?" Michael puffed up, saying, "I dispute the characterization of approved. I was acting in the community's best interest." The judge didn't even look up. "Did you get permits?" "It was for beautification." "Did you get utility clearance?" We assumed the lines were clearly marked. Were they? That was the final nail in her coffin. The judge leaned back, tapped his pen, and asked, "Is this clause still active?" I nodded. Michael didn't. The judge turned to her, "Ma'am?" She hesitated, then muttered, "Yes, but we were planning to amend it." "You mean after the incident?" The judge replied. "You can't retroactively change liability clauses to avoid responsibility." He turned back to me. "Do you have the total cost of the damage?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor, $28,000 and change." He nodded. "Triple damages would be $84,000. Is that what you're requesting?" I nodded again. Michael absolutely lost it. "This is insane. This is extortion. You're twisting our own rules against us." The judge, barely reacting, let out a small, weary chuckle. as if he'd heard it all before. He scribbled something down and delivered the verdict so quickly it was like he'd already planned the punchline. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $84,000. Payment is due within 45 days of this decision. If unpaid, wage garnishment or a lien against HOA assets will be filed. Michael froze, her mouth slightly agape, as if her brain had stopped working. I simply nodded, thanked the judge, grabbed my things, and walked out slowly, making sure to pass Michael. Her glare was as sharp as ever, but I wasn't concerned. The best part? The courtroom was open to the public, and sitting in the back, trying to act casual but failing miserably, were 3 of my neighbors. Phones discreetly tucked in their laps, no doubt recording or simply enjoying the show. By the time I got home, the neighborhood group chat was already buzzing. Carl texted me, "Please tell me she cried." Greg sent a meme of Michael photoshopped as the Wicked Witch of the West, melting. Someone even made a fake invoice. Petty damages. $84,000. Paid in full by Queen Karen. I didn't need to post anything myself. The neighborhood had already turned Michael's downfall into a community project. But Michael, being Michael, wasn't done embarrassing herself. A week later, she sent a letter to every household in the neighborhood. Typed, printed, folded like she was still in charge. The letter announced that while she would step back from her day-to-day duties, she would still serve as an advisor to ensure the integrity of neighborhood values. Translation: she couldn't let go of control, but her authority was long gone. The board quickly followed up with an email clarifying that Michael no longer had any official role and was excluded from all decision-making processes. But of course, Michael's loyal and confused followers tried to defend her. One of them posted on a neighborhood forum, he just wanted money. It wasn't about the damage. I responded with a single photo of my flooded crawl space, time-stamped. The thread was shut down within hours. The new board dove into reviewing every decision Michael had made over the past 2 years. Contracts, expenditures, maintenance projects. It was like opening a Pandora's box of negligence. The contractor who broke my pipe? His business license had expired. The sidewalk project budget? Overdrawn by $12,000. And guess where that money went? To Michael's cousin. Now, the entire neighborhood was demanding answers. Talks of hiring a forensic accountant emerged. The HOA's treasurer resigned suddenly, and more neighbors began putting up "not part of the HOA" signs in their yards, following my lead. Michael's empire was collapsing, one email at a time. Meanwhile, I started sketching plans for a new front garden, complete with stonework, a koi pond, and a tasteful plaque that read, "Landscaping funded by poor leadership decisions." One afternoon, while I was out measuring the lawn, Michael drove by. Our eyes met. She didn't wave, didn't even blink, just stared before speeding off like she was late for a meeting with Karma. Karma wasn't waiting anymore. It had already moved in and started renovating. The HOA's insurance provider finally weighed in, refusing to cover the judgment. They said it was an internal governance issue, meaning the board had to come up with the funds themselves. Special assessments? Emergency dues? No way. The neighbors were done. Nobody was going to pay for Michael's mistakes. They wanted justice. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, I got a call. Not a voicemail, not a text, but an actual phone call from the HOA's new interim president. She wanted to meet. Not about the payment, she said, but about something bigger. "We found something in the old files, and you're going to want to see it." I told her to email it. She hesitated and said, "This one's better in person." That's when I knew the rabbit hole went deeper. I met Linda, the new interim president, the next morning at the community rec center. She was nothing like Michael. No power suits, no thinly veiled threats. Just jeans, a legal pad, and a straightforward approach. She slid a file across the table and said, "Okay, so this might sound crazy, but by now, that was practically our neighborhood motto." I opened the file and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Apparently, Michael had overlooked a very crucial detail in the original neighborhood development plans. The land my house sat on, along with 3 other properties on the same edge of the community, had never been legally incorporated into the HOA. Not only was my property excluded from the HOA jurisdiction, but Michael had known this. She'd signed an amendment request 2 years ago trying to annex my property, and it had been officially denied by the city. In other words, everything she had done, every fee, fine, notice, and threat, had been based on authority she simply didn't have. Linda looked at me and said, "We want to make this right, not just with the settlement." Then, she added, "And we'd like your help dismantling the HOA charter." That moment hit hard. Michael wasn't just losing her grip on power. Her whole little regime was crumbling, piece by piece. The neighbors had turned against her, the board had collapsed, and now new leadership was ready to burn down the HOA bylaws and start fresh. A few weeks ago, all I wanted was to fix my plumbing. Now, I was somehow becoming the reluctant face of the anti-HOA movement in our cul-de-sac. I told Linda I'd think about it, and went home to crack open a beer, staring at the mess that had once been my front yard. The contractor's damage had mostly been repaired. New pipes, fresh sod, the whole shebang. But I'd left one spot untouched, right where the geyser had burst out of the ground like a suburban Old Faithful. I was planning something special, a little monument, nothing tacky, just a fountain with a carved stone plaque reading, "In memory of logic and plumbing destroyed by ego, funded by HOA stupidity." I figured that would get the right message across. Over the next few weeks, Michael's name was scrubbed from everything. Every document, every group chat, all wiped clean. Community meetings were finally open to all, and people actually showed up. Some were annoyed, others curious, but no one looked shocked when Linda began uncovering how bad things had gotten under Michael's rule. Turns out, Michael had been approving expenses without a vote, bypassing processes, and giving contracts to family members, all while racking up dodgy charges. Some receipts were for catered brunches at Michael's house, and others for morale events that conveniently coincided with spa trips. It had been a full-blown suburban dictatorship. As for the money Michael owed me, it arrived quietly in the form of a certified check. No note, just cold, silent compliance. I cashed it, of course. I replaced the water heater, fixed the foundation, and threw in a few upgrades just for fun. Heated floors in the bathroom, a smart irrigation system. Heck, I even splurged on a new grill, because why not? Petty revenge tastes best with grilled ribs on a freshly landscaped patio. But the real fun came when Michael tried to ease her way back into the neighborhood social scene. She started showing up at open board meetings, sitting at the back, pretending she hadn't been the cause of half the community's trust issues. No one acknowledged her. No one invited her to speak. She'd raise her hand, and people would look the other way. I watched with detached satisfaction as I knew I had already won the war, while she was left to watch the ruins of her own reputation. Eventually, Michael made her final play. She submitted a request to run for the board again in the upcoming neighborhood election. She had flyers printed, posted them herself, touting experienced leadership, proven vision, and a return to integrity. I nearly choked on my coffee. The community didn't just laugh, they revolted. Greg and Carl made parody versions of her flyer and passed them door to door. One had her face photoshopped onto Napoleon, and another said, "Vote Michael for HOA dictator, now with fewer rights." Election night was a formality. Michael got exactly one vote, hers. She moved out the following month. Rumor has it she tried to sell the house herself, but no one wanted to touch it. Bad karma and dying hydrangeas don't exactly sell a home. Eventually, she listed it through an agency and left without saying goodbye. The day she drove away, someone placed a lawn gnome in her front yard with a sign reading, "Tyrant evicted." It stayed there for weeks. As for the HOA, or what was left of it, we voted to dissolve it entirely. The neighborhood became self-governed, with no more arbitrary fines, no more secret meetings. Just decent people mowing their lawns and occasionally laughing about the time Michael turned a simple sidewalk repair into a legal disaster. I still get asked about it. At barbecues, in the grocery store, sometimes by complete strangers who heard the tale of the sewage sprinkler lady. People love the drama, the petty justice, the perfect collapse of someone who thought she was untouchable. And honestly, I get it. It's satisfying in a way that's hard to explain unless you've ever stood ankle-deep in your own flooded crawl space, staring at two confused contractors, while some woman in pastel slacks tells you it's your fault for having plumbing in the first place. The fountain I built is now a neighborhood favorite. Kids throw pennies in it. Neighbors joke that it brings good luck, and someone even started calling it the well of justice. I don't correct them. As for me, I sleep like a baby. Sometimes when I walk out onto my porch, sip my coffee, and enjoy the quiet morning air, I think about how close I came to letting it all go. How easy it would have been to just chalk it up as a loss, fix the damage, and move on. But then I remember Michael's voice, smug, dismissive, telling me to call insurance like my whole property was a minor inconvenience. And I smile. Because standing up to her wasn't just about money or property lines or even bylaws. It was about showing people like her that they don't get to trample over others just because they hide behind clipboards and committee titles. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a warning to every petty tyrant lurking in suburbia with a laminated handbook and a power complex. The next time someone in a polo shirt knocks on your door, demanding you repaint your mailbox or cut your grass to the right height, just remember this. Sometimes the bylaws are sharper than the sword. And if you're lucky, your enemy will be dumb enough to write them themselves. Thank you for watching this story until the end. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe for more HOA Untold Realities.